For those of you who have arrived and are wondering what's happening, perhaps let's go to the antitrust slide and then we can do this spiel. You're at the AI study group kickoff meeting, and before it starts, we're going to show the Linux Foundation antitrust policy notice. We always show this at the beginning of Linux Foundation meetings. The full policy is on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from our member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Meanwhile, and this is completely unauthorized and inaccurate and not usable, we have asked AI to create a haiku to summarize our antitrust policy, and it's in the chat. But for the benefit of those watching this recording, it is Linux meets, laws guide competitors unite, abide innovators tide. As perfectly accurate, I think. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Matthew to actually run the meeting and to do sensible things from here on in.
Thank you, Shane. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining. This is going to be the first of a first AI study group for OpenChain. We are going to be repeating this session at 9 o'clock next Thursday, UK time, and we will have other people sort of joining us from around the world there. We plan to summarize that session at the next one of these meetings in 2 weeks' time. At this time, in 2 weeks' time. And that's how we are going to try and do these meetings, to try and cover as many different time zones as possible. And we can revisit that in 3 months to see if this is working, if we're meeting too frequently or not enough, or need to change it somehow. So thank you and welcome to you for joining. We do appreciate it. The point of this kickoff session is really to have a bit of a discussion, and it's really, what do we want to achieve? There are sort of 7 or 8 people on this call. OpenChain is a sort of much wider community, but it would be great to have your input into what our end goals are, and then we're going to sort of open out to how we can achieve those goals. We kind of got together as a bit of background. We kind of met about 6 months ago, the OpenChain groups, and we proposed that we have an AI study group because AI is becoming to the sort of forefront of the industry. More people are using it. We have sort of succeeded in OpenChain with a number of standards, and here was an opportunity to see if we can help build trust in this community. Moving to around December of last year, Dave Marr gave a presentation at the Open Source Summit in Japan, sort of launching this AI group and welcoming people, and I appreciate you all for joining here today. So, as I said, meeting setup, we kind of just touched on briefly and we'll readdress, but the main part of this presentation is around goals and how we can achieve them. Anyone got any comments at the start now? Hearing none, I shall move on. I only have 2 slides, which you'll be glad to hear. So I do want people to come off mute and make the most of this time, and let's have a sort of a discussion. And so these are sort of just my thoughts about an AI study group. What do we think we want to try and achieve? And as I said, OpenChain has succeeded with a licensing standard and a security standard to sort of build trust and build processes and policies throughout the industry, not necessarily stating exactly how we do the detail, but just sort of the general principles. And I was thinking, I think a number of us, when we've spoken in the past, were thinking maybe we can have some form of industry-wide agreement with AI management. We can develop certain principles for building trust within the supply chain, whether that is, understanding that if my company uses AI tools, you are comfortable with sort of receiving that information because I have used it in sort of certain ways. So maybe we have a transparent data set and we've checked for biases, and sort of human beings have verified the things that I am sending to you. And if we agree on all of these points, and your company and my company, we have both signed up to this standard, we can say that we trust the product, the distribution of IP towards throughout that supply chain. So I merely highlight just a couple of things there: transparency and bias. But do you all agree? What do you want to get out of this AI study group? What are your thoughts? And with that, I will open it up for discussion. I will take some notes, and we can go from there. So who would like to be first and kick off with their thoughts on the goals for the AI study group? And we have silence. Somebody has raised their hand. Jimmy, I don't have the power to unmute. Unmute yourself and please go ahead.
I will unmute myself. Thank you, Matthew. So for me, I think you were very poignant when you said, how can I trust this organization using AI and the deliverables they send me? For me, it's how do I even trust my own organization? What things do I need to put in place? So I would really like to get out of this defining the problems, defining the compliance issues, the management issues around AI use, especially in the open source field, and come to a common understanding at least of what are the issues, what are we trying to solve for here? Because there's of course a number of issues, but unless we agree what is actual problems we're trying to fix, I don't think we'll get very far in creating trust if we all have different views on what the problem is. So for me, it would be a huge win just to get the understanding of us all trying to solve for the same things. And if we can take this group to the level where we actually have industry standard practices for how those things should be solved, not necessarily in the implementation details, but rather that these are things that need to be solved. There needs to exist a process. We need to check for these things. I think that'd be terrific work.
Thanks, Jimmy. And I agree. I think we should also look, internally and define those problems, and then we may be able to solve them. I noticed somebody's just joined using their phone. I don't know if you're able to just identify who you are. No? Okay. Let's open the conversation up to anyone else. Anyone want to add anything to Jimmy's point? No? Are people happy with kind of what I've got on the slide and what Jimmy has proposed?
Hey Shane, this is Tiffany from Sony.
Hey,
Sorry, I'm
Tiffany.
in the car, so I struggle to find how to unmute myself. I just want to say that I really like the ideas that you have on the slide, and in particular the last bullet point about transparency and bias, and a little bit to Jimmy's point about how do you know what you're doing is right. I think that is in other conversations that I'm in other multi-stakeholder groups, trying to even identify what is appropriate kind of information that should be disclosed and about an AI system or a data set is important. The challenge in AI is that a lot of times it depends on what the actual use case may be, right? So for example, bias in one sense, bias can be different based off what the intended use case is. And so it's really hard sometimes to scope out, well, what should a balanced data set, for example, look like? Or even if something is, evaluated on a certain benchmark, does that benchmark make sense for different use cases? And so I think diving into that area as well and trying to kind of suss out what is kind of the minimum, information that a user would need to understand to even be able to evaluate whether or not an AI model or technology is appropriate for use, I think would be highly beneficial for the industry. I think there's still kind of a lack of understanding, particularly on the ethics aspects of AI, but there's still a lot of work to be done that would be interesting to pull together from a standards perspective.
Thanks for that.
Matthew, this is Marcel.
Hi, Marcel.
My question to this slide is, I mean, I like the ideas, I like the bullet points, and I get the idea. But I'm a little bit missing the words open source on this slide. And perhaps the general question is this a general AI study group where we want to discuss and study many things about AI, or is it always in the very near context of open source and AI? I think this we should be
my intention was for it to be around open source and AI. Now, a lot of the companies that we work for also have proprietary IP in there as well. So we may want to sort of expand or see if it's appropriate for us to translate some of the outcomes of it. But yeah, my interpretation of this was not to focus entirely on general AI related topics. It was open source related AI queries. Does everyone else kind of agree? I mean, OpenChain really has been around that open source area.
I will vehemently agree with you, Matthew, and I will also say that there is an ongoing discussion on what is actually open source AI or open AI. I think we do wisely with staying away from that and just framing this conversation as AI use related to open source or in an open source setting. I think a lot of what we come up with will probably be relevant even for proprietary AI implementations, and even proprietary AIs will likely have been trained on open source data. So I will assume that there's a lot of open source connotations to any AI implementation or any AI usage.
Yeah, and I think it would make sense to make it clear on these goals, bullet points as well. Just that we all have the same understanding also when someone reads the slides and so on, because otherwise we very quickly delve into general AI discussions, where many other forums and other conversations going on. Particularly, for example, the last bullet point. I think it's always interesting to put on the glasses of open source and what is the open source relevance or the specifics for open source AI. This was just, I think we have the same understanding, but I think it would make sense to also make it clear on the bullet points.
Thank you, Marcel. I certainly heed that point that it's not mentioned, and I think if this group is in agreement, we will focus on that open source thread around AI.
And I think in some cases it also makes sense to look into great work already done for general AI topics, and then identify what is the difference when it comes to open source and what are the differences really. That perhaps we don't need to reinvent the wheel for some topics, and we can just think about the particular amendments or the specifics for open source and this topic.
Are you thinking of any papers in particular, Marcel, when you say great work?
I need to look it up. I mean, I don't know it off the top of my head, but Yeah, I think PwC is also involved in some research in this topic and so on. And I need to look it up, and perhaps there are interesting things which I can share.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this point. While I agree that the focus should be on open source, the way I view it is that because it's open source, it's almost like as if the standards are higher, right? You have to do what everyone who's doing with proprietary information plus more, right? Because I feel like the threshold for proprietary IP is much lower, right? Or, if I wanted to license something, it's much easier to do that than to actually set an open source standard. The transparency requirements I would need for, some proprietary matters would just be what's required by the law, where in the open source community, it feels like it should be more, right? You should have more information because you're not going to necessarily have that kind of back and forth with the developer. So I think even though some of the work may be redundant or ride off of the other initiatives that are going on in AI more generally, I think those are still going to need to be part of the base for any kind of open source discussion, just because those will all need to feed into an open source aspect. One element that I think is interesting that I don't know if this group should be involved in, or as I said, kind of just lean on what's happening already in the industry, is around the concept of why current open source licenses don't work for AI, which is in particular about use restrictions, which I think is why people say why open source doesn't maybe work for all AI models. So I think that's something that I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on, whether or not they view this group, kind of taking on that discussion and moving that forward, or just letting that ride out through the other groups that are already working on it.
Okay.
Another point as to why it matters more or all these things matters more for open source related AI is that if the proprietary AI solution I source from someone, I can manage my risks in that supplier relationship. If this is open source, I have no supplier that I can manage that risk with. So for me, if I'm, say it's a generative AI model or data set, then of course I will have higher requirements on it if it's not from a setting where I can manage my risk in some other way, when I'm sort of all alone and responsible for my risk.
Hi, this is Jeff from Qualcomm. I have a question. When we kind of differentiate between maybe proprietary and open source and talk about open source, are we grouping into that kind of open data license stuff? Does that fall in the bucket of open source? Like perhaps a data set under Open Data Commons or something?
That's a great thing, Jeff. I think we get to define what is within scope.
Interesting license, because it almost mimics open source, of course, with quasi source availability requirements on turning on certain types of use and such.
Indeed. What do other people think about open data?
I think we are probably better off including too much than too little. So for me, it sort of walks and talks and smells the same as open source in this setting. So I'm fine including it. I don't want to sort of artificially exclude something that would sort of take away from the usefulness of this discussion or this project. So I think going for a broad and kind of liberal approach to what we include is probably better.
I'd like to add, I echo a lot of Jimmy's earlier comments, but if the ultimate goal is enabling use and trust and supply chain trust, perhaps identifying and recording dependencies, how to conform and track traceability of all these things, adding open data is, I think, essential to that, or else we just kind of have a hole in that trust.
I think someone's put something in the chat. AI without training data would not do anything. Certainly agree with that comment.
Yeah, that was me. But add to the comment that if open data should be part of it, I think why not? Because AI without the data, what good would that do? Nothing.
I mean, is there a way we can structure it into the different dimensions, like the user interface, the AI model, the weights, and the data? I mean, these are the 4 dimensions which are relevant or required, or however you want to call it, for AI. And I guess we should talk about all these dimensions, including data.
Was that Marcel? Can you just repeat that? Weights and data, the AI model. Did you say there was a 4th thing?
Yeah, sorry, perhaps a little bit louder. Yeah. So I don't know, perhaps there are 4 dimensions we can talk about, like user interface, model, weights, and data.
Yeah.
And
So I think just to summarize where we are now, having discussed kind of certain goals, I agree the slide doesn't specify open source, but we want to include things like open source, open data, things like the weights, user interface. We're not trying to solve every AI problem here. There's probably a thread that we want to bring into with ethics. That's something we want to discuss. And equally, if we do want to build trust within that organization, I think this was Jimmy's first point, we want to understand what we need to do internally within our own companies to have good management there, to then build that trust with intra-organizational transfer of open source work. Does anyone else want to add any other comments before I move on to the second and last topic for discussion, which is around how we do all of this? Okay. So achieving our goals. I think it was just kind of short and sweet here. There's clearly a lot that we want to cover, as I just kind of summarized. We can meet up and we can talk and talk and talk. We're probably going to need some form of commitment from people to start bringing additional topics to the conversation. And so really I'm looking for a bit of commitment for people here to come to these meetings regularly and present on certain themes, documenting them down so we can kind of capture a summary of what good looks like, and then present it back to other people within OpenChain to see if there's some appetite to continue progressing this study group. Are people in agreement with that? And do you think you'll be able to sort of commit to attend at least semi-regularly these sessions so we can actually progress things?
I would be very keen to participate as often as possible and the vast majority of all. I'd be happy
Thanks,
for
Jimmy.
that. I think this is a very important topic, and also spend some time and resources on documenting these things. I don't know what sort of the next particular step here would be that you have in mind. One proposal from me is if we start outlining some of these things on the OpenChain GitHub, for example, with I don't know if we do issues with these are AI concerns or AI pain points that need to be addressed, so that we're back to this problem statement: what problems or what risks exist with open source related AI use. That would be one place to start.
Great, I agree. I think I saw a thumbs up from Marcel as well to help with the commitment there. It's something we can do. We can summarize everything in the GitHub and maybe start meeting and start discussing some of the individual themes in more detail. That was all I wanted to cover. Are others willing to kind of meet semi-regularly as well?
Hi, this is Brian here. Sorry, I was having audio issues before. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Just personally, Tuesdays are really, really rough for me. If we could find another day, that would be very helpful.
Thanks, Brian. Are you based in the States?
Yeah, I'm out in San Diego,
Okay.
so I'm flexible on time. Just Tuesdays are just uniquely tough for me.
Okay.
This is Jeff. I'm game to participate.
Okay. Is there one topic you'd like to spend a bit more time on when we meet, probably again in a couple of weeks, which would be either around sort of general management, defining the scope as in open source? We could try and have a stab at a discussion around ethics, what people think ethical AI might be. If not, I can propose a theme and sort of send that out beforehand, and we can prepare maybe based on, as Marcel said, there's plenty of white papers out there that we can piggyback off. Okay, well, if there's nothing else we want to talk about today, I'm happy to call time for the first session. That's certainly been helpful for me to sort of get a bit more of a sort of kickoff there. Does anyone else have any other business? Otherwise, we can close the meeting. No? Okay. Like I said, I'll summarize this meeting when we meet on Tuesday morning UK time, which will be sort of Europe, Asia, preferred time zones. And then I can summarize that meeting when we start again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.